Welcome, Senator Cory Booker. I should just start out by saying that it's a distinct honor and privilege for you to join a How conversation. And I so much look forward to you sharing and purveying some of your wisdom that you earned the hard way by forging a path of leadership and through some of the hardest ways at all. We learn wisdom through adversity, and that you've been leading first and foremost with empathy and heart and love at your core, and animating you has always stood out to me, and therefore it's a distinct privilege to have you with us.
I can't say if I'm worthy of rising to all the values you put forward, but I hope it's a worthy conversation at my attempts to be better.
Well, I'm sure you will make it so. And just to remind those who are going to join us, our mission at the How Institute, Senator Booker, is to build and nurture a culture of moral leadership, of principled decision-making and values-based behavior throughout society. Let's start where it all began. You raised your hand, you ran for mayor successfully of Newark. You then became a senator. Consciously and self-consciously, you looked in the mirror and saw a leader and somebody that should embrace the responsibility that comes with leadership. Your leadership journey, where does it start? What animates it? What framework do you use to guide it? Let's just start with that personal core of yours.
Well, James Baldwin said children are never good at listening to their elders, but they never fail to imitate them. And my model of leadership was what I saw in my mother and father as I was growing up. And, they were two of the trailblazers of African Americans in corporate world for executives at IBM. And yet they were still very involved in leading organizations, nonprofits. And so I grew up around this understanding of people that you judge your life not by your personal accomplishments, but by your willingness to do for others.
So Senator Booker, leadership, in my view, is not about headlines. We can all read the headlines. They invade and we struggle with them day in, day out. Recently, some of the headlines have been challenging, from the pandemic to civil unrest to misinformation that is actively dividing us, to the ways in which our society is polarized. We grapple with the headlines, but leadership is really about trend lines. Step back with us. What are the large trend lines? Where are they pointing? And then what framework do you use to head towards that horizon?
So I live in an incredible community. Where I'm sitting right now is Newark's Central Ward, which was, when I moved here back in the late 90s, one of the poorest census tracts in New Jersey, where people did not mistake wealth with worth. And when I moved here, I was stunned, even though I had worked in everywhere by then, from New Haven to East Palo Alto, to actually live in a community, being part of it, and go to bed with gunshots, to see the environmental toxins and how they affected families, from epidemic lead poisoning to see people who do everything right and play by the rules, but yet still find themselves in crisis, not of their own making. And so when you talk about trend lines, I really do worry that we live in a country where we have a deep poverty of empathy, and where it's just very difficult for us to understand, as King so eloquently said, that we're all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in one garment of destiny, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And what's aggravating that to me is a lot of very invested organizations that are trying to find ways to further polarize us as a nation and make it even more difficult to find humility and empathy and a lack of judgment. And the trend that worries me most is that the hate of each other is growing so much more deep in this nation, where it makes it even more difficult to be humble before each other, to listen, to try to know, all of which are ingredients necessary to create a more beloved society. And the risks often to get out of that demonization, where you otherize another person who's a different political party or a different geography, where the risks to actually reach out and try to build that bridge of understanding and empathy. This world needs the best of who America is, not a divisive, cacophony of conflict, but a country that can find common ground and stand together for our common values.
You said and shared so much, and it's uplifting to hear, and yet doesn't feel so easily graspable. And because we've been divided before, Senator, but I think what you're saying is we're not just divided, we are being actively divided by certain organizations, by forces, by technological forces. The kind of leadership, what's the leadership playbook that helps bend towards justice, towards commonality?
Well, I think the first thing that I've learned and struggled with is that we all are leaders, that we can't just criticize what's going on out there without taking some responsibility in here in our hearts, and to say, I am responsible. I'm not to blame necessarily, but that idea that I have to take responsibility and not do what the most common way people kind of give up their power is not realizing they have it in the first place, that we all are very, very powerful. And so right now that we don't need more finger pointing. And I'm not saying to excuse the behaviors of others or not be candid and direct about the injustices, but you should not point a finger until you ask yourself, what can I do about this? And I have to be honest with you. One of my great teachers in my the arc of my political world was Donald Trump. And I say that because he showed me a great mirror of who I was. And there were times I failed to live up to my own ideals of what it means to lead with love, where I did not rise. And then I was able to see myself at my best. I remember running for president and running for a town hall stage. And I get stopped at the bottom of the stage, and a man says to me, very enthusiastic, thinking that, again, this Democratic group of people meeting in Iowa, this was to give him hell to the Republicans. And he says to me, dude, I want you to punch Donald Trump in the face. And I look at him and I smile and I go, dude, that's a felony. and we don't need that. Yeah. That's darkness trying to fight darkness. Let's change the frequency. And I got up and I gave a speech about, we didn't beat Bull Connor because we brought bigger dogs and bigger fire hoses. These were artists of activism who found a way to raise the moral imagination of a country, change the frequency, and inspire so much light and love that it cast out that darkness. And so I saw myself get pulled down, and I saw myself struggle to rise. And that's what we should be thinking every single day if we are to be leaders. Nothing you do happens in a vacuum.
What you say is it's profound that we're all leaders. And in many ways, the pandemic has underscored that.
Yes.
Because leadership has always mattered, but the pandemic showed us that it matters exponentially more so when we are so existentially threatened. This is a time where everybody can look in the mirror and say, I can lead if the imperative of leadership is social cohesion, high trust, collaboration and cooperation, so that we can move together when a pandemic comes, and another one will. So how can we get the message across that leadership matters exponentially more, but that everybody has an opportunity, if not an obligation, to lead?
I think that we all have to be messengers of that. And I think of the theologian that said, everywhere I go, I preach the gospel, but only when necessary do I use words. And so I just know that the only cure for what ails our society, our inability to come together, is the millions of acts of grace, millions of acts of grace. And what is grace but unmerited kindness, decency, and love? I know that I am unworthy of some of the kindnesses that have been demonstrated towards me along my journey, especially in this glorious place called the Central Ward, where even amidst my brokenness and my inability to manifest the best of myself, people along the way, other leaders, whether they're tenant leaders, nonprofit organization leaders, or other members of government, extended to me grace, which offered healing and created bonds that didn't exist before. And so the first thing I hope that every day, even in the face of an outrageous moment of assault, as opposed to venting on them, we extend a period of grace. I'm involved in a big negotiation, and I'm sorry not to be more specific, but I had an interview where somebody asked me about the Republicans, and I I didn't fall into that trap. And I talked about painting with a broad brush, whether it's police or Republicans or what have you. And there was another member of Congress who saw that, not somebody that I necessarily went accord with all the time, but told me what that meant to them to hear me stop in a moment where it had been so easy to fall into the continued rhetoric here, but to show the humanity of people that are of a different party or a different organization. We need millions and millions of those moments where we stop and lead with love, even if we somehow believe the person isn't deserving of it, even though I believe we all deserve grace and love and decency.
You came to the Senate with a unique and deep commitment to bipartisanship, that you were really going to try with the criminal justice reform and the First Step legislation. That was a bipartisan achievement. I've seen you get pulled towards partisanship, but what I'm seeing as part of your leadership playbook is that you interrogate yourself. How am I doing? Am I off mission? So I think one of the fundamental problems or challenges of the 21st century is you can't imagine a world without formal authority. We need presidents, senators, head football coaches, principals, CEOs. We need these positions of formal authority. But the world really works when individuals with moral authority occupy positions of formal authority. Two questions. What is the state of that equation? Do we really have moral leaders with moral authority in positions of formal authority where we need them most? And to the extent we don't, what's the playbook of building moral authority and having that accorded to you so that when you have power and you're in charge, you could lead with a moral core and towards higher ethical standards?
So again, I feel uncomfortable giving a prescription when I am no specialist or doctor. I just know my own journey, and I know what times I've slipped. I know times I've gotten it right, and it's often unexpected. Like I talk to people about Senator Inhofe, who is somebody that could often trigger people on my side of the aisle, very conservative senator. But I made a decision, as you said, to come to the Senate and want to try to find ways to build connection across the aisle to get things done. And I remember walking into his office for a Bible study. And my implicit biases, we all have them, was that I was stunned, surprised, I have to say, to see him on his mantle in his hideaway office, a picture of him and a black girl. And I asked him who it was, and it turned out to be his adopted daughter, and with a very moving story that was a part of that. And getting that understanding led months and months later to me going to him to partner on an amendment to a big bill when they were not taking amendments about foster children and on homeless children. And we bonded over that, and we got that amendment done. That's now part of the law of the land. And it was a lesson for me to learn that I cannot put the totality of an individual in a box. I have to give them space for growth, or for me, space to have a deeper understanding of the nuances of their being. I have to give everyone pathways to redemption, because Lord knows I've needed people to open up pathways for myself. And so I don't have any great prescription other than trying to, as a leader, to be open with my own imperfections, with my own struggles, and hope that my travails can instruct and inform other people in their struggles to live up to the moment that we're in.
Well, and that's just a beautiful way of saying humility.
Yeah, I'm stunned at times to live in a time in society where even admitting you're wrong is a political liability, or that you've evolved on an issue is a political liability. And I want to be someone that takes more risks in the name of love or humility or kindness or grace.
We've spoken broadly about our society, acknowledging that we live in a democratic system. Our economic system is that of capitalism. And I know that you're on the Senate Committee of Entrepreneurship and Business. What's the state of, and think of the magic and the marvelous innovations and creations that are part of our lives, that especially the US capitalistic system has catalyzed and responsible for. Think of how the tide has gone higher and lifted so many boats. And at the same time, capitalism itself, our economic system, it is being questioned. Is it inclusive sufficiently? have its hard edges been smoothed out enough for it to work? What's the state of capitalism, of business today?
So I'm a devotee of free market capitalism and will defend that system in the same way that Adam Smith wrote about it. Remember, he was a philosopher about what is the best ways.
Yeah. He was a moral philosopher, not just a philosopher. He was the chairman of the moral philosophy department at Glasgow University.
I'm so happy you said it. His essay on moral sentiments about the obligations of capitalism. So I'm going to just say this, and it might trigger some people, but I think what we have now is a perversion of the ideals of capitalism, and it's changed dramatically since the early 1980s. Capitalism today is not the capitalism that my father experienced, and whether it's the fact that businesses had a different set of constituents and obligations. You have American Airlines raising the salaries of their flight attendants, and some guy in Wall Street who looks at the ratings of their stock downgraded their ratings because they said, how could this person give raises to their flight attendants? And so now we have people that are so concerned about their quarterly reporting, this short-termism, very different than the capitalism of the past, where people were looking towards long-term growth. What is real value that I'm creating? But now you have this warped system where I got applause. I've seen speeches of CEOs all around this country applauding this idea that they know. In fact, we looked at a study that over 80% of COOs say that we have made decisions against the long-term interest of our company in order to meet these quarterly reports. So all through our society right now, we're seeing perversions of capitalism that my father's generation would have been stunned to see what was going on. So I want to see more of a free market. I want to see more competition. I want to see more fair competition. I want government to stop with their subsidies, picking winners and losers and undermining the free market. I want products to reflect their true costs and not the values they might win, whether it's oil companies or others win through government subsidies.
At the core of your leadership is grace, as you say, and humility and love. But we both know that a leader is also a dealer in hope and pervades hope, especially at a time where people, some might be bereft of hope. What gives you hope? What can you say to inspire more hope? I think it would be really appropriate to end on that note.
I'm moved by the question, and I have to say that people, what gives me hope are the people that have every reason to surrender to cynicism or to delve into despair, and yet they choose hope. As one woman who lived up the street taught me through her own example, that hope is the active conviction that despair will never have the last word. And so I'm going to try to live up to that example and always be an agent of hope and light, even in the most despairing and dark times.
What a beautiful sentiment and conviction and leadership imperative for you that others can embrace. Is there anything else you'd like to just impart or share, or I'm happy to call it a wrap on that?
I will just say thank you to this incredible institute. We're all rushed and so busy that we never stop for a second and reflect as we should on what are the moral foundations of this country. We began a nation with these imperfect geniuses who came together, and even though they're flaws, they put into the world ideals, the highest heights of humanity that have shaped the planet Earth. And I love the Declaration of Independence, and I'll end with that. It ends with one of my favorite sentences in all of American society, because they knew they were declaring independence, but they knew of the power of the interdependence and how much we need each other and rely on each other. And they said, basically, if we're going to make it as this young fledgling idea of a nation, if this great American experiment is going to make it, we must, and the quote, mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. You all are folks that really get into this idea of sacred honor. And what is that? What is the fiber of this nation? What is the connective tissue of this country? We may think we're divided, but we are a part of one body politic. And your institute forces us to slow down, to reflect, and to affirm that connection, that sinew, that very fabric of America.
Thank you so much, Senator Cory Booker, for joining me in conversation. It's been a great honor and, of course, a great pleasure.